He pointed to a chair at the far end of the table, shoved among the interns, and told me to sit. My son wanted me to look small in the company I built with my own 2 hands. He thought I was a broken, grieving old man. He was about to learn that you don't humiliate the man who holds the blueprint to your entire life. If you're listening to this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Let me back up and tell you how a man goes from designing engines to being called dead weight. It started 6 days ago when I buried the love of my life. The Chicago wind was bitter. It cut right through my coat. It smelled like frozen dirt, and the dying flowers piled on Elizabeth's grave. She'd been gone less than a week. 42 years we were married. 42 years we built Everlast Machining. I knew the machines. The smell of oil and steel was my perfume. Elizabeth? She was the heart? Now the heart was gone, and the silence in our house was a physical weight. I sat in her study. Condolence cards piled up on the mantelpiece. I hadn't opened a single one. Grief wasn't just sadness. It was exhaustion, a deep, aching fatigue that settled in my bones. I just wanted the world to stop. But the world doesn't stop for grief, and my son was proof of that. The study door opened. No knock. Richard, my son, walked in. He wore one of those sharp Italian suits that cost more than a machinist's monthly salary. His wife Sarah was right behind him. Her eyes scanned the room, not looking at me, looking at the furniture, the art, appraising, always appraising. Sashid joined Everlast 5 years ago, MBA in hand, full of ideas, modernization, optimization, words that sounded slick but meant nothing on the factory floor. I tried to teach him the feel of the metal, the hum of a perfectly tuned lathe. He wasn't interested in the machines. He was interested in the corner office. And now he was here to take it. "Dad, we need to talk," Richard said. His voice was smooth, practiced, like a salesman closing a deal. No warmth, no sympathy. I looked up. My eyes burned. I hadn't slept since the hospital. "Richard, please. Not today. I can't think." "It has to be today, Dad," he insisted. He paced the room, adjusting his cufflinks, a nervous tic he always had when he was pushing an agenda. The market is volatile. The board is nervous. They need stability. Stability? He meant control. Sarah chimed in. She perched on the edge of Elizabeth's favorite armchair. Elizabeth managed things so closely. "Thomas?" She really did. Her voice dripped with fake sympathy. It made my skin crawl. In that she's gone, there are gaps, big gaps, gaps they were eager to fill. They couldn't even wait until the ground settled over her coffin. I sighed. The weight of the world was crushing my shoulders. I didn't have the strength to fight. Everlast was my life, but it was also Richard's legacy. Elizabeth would have wanted him to step up. I told myself I had to trust him. "What do you need me to do?" I whispered. The words tasted like ash. Richard pulled a thick stack of papers from his leather briefcase. He set them on the desk, right over Elizabeth's gardening magazines. "We need to formalize the transition," he said, clicking a silver pen. "This names me CEO, effective immediately." He pushed the papers toward me. "It allows me to handle the immediate financial decisions," he continued. "Keep the operations running smoothly while you grieve." His eyes met mine, clear, sharp, focused, not the eyes of a grieving son, the eyes of an executive. But I was too tired, too broken. He was my blood, my only child. "Fine," I said. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled. I signed my name, Thomas Wright, on the dotted line. I thought I was securing Elizabeth's legacy. I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't realize I was signing my own death warrant. Richard took the papers. He didn't say thank you. He didn't hug me. He just nodded. "Good. The board meeting is tomorrow at 9. Be there." He turned and left. Sarah gave one last look around the room, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. The silence returned, heavier than before, and much, much colder. The next morning, I forced myself to put on a suit. The fabric felt stiff, unfamiliar. I drove to the factory. The familiar roar of the machines usually calmed my soul. Today it sounded harsh, metallic, like a warning I couldn't understand. I walked into the main boardroom. The long oak table was surrounded by the board members, people I had known for decades, people who had shared holidays at our house. Mr. Davis, a longtime family lawyer, gave me a brief, sad nod. He looked uncomfortable. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That should have been my first clue that something was terribly terrible. Richard was already standing at the head of the table, in my chair, the chair I had occupied for 30 years. Sarah sat beside him, tapping away on a sleek laptop. She looked up when I entered. That smug look plastered on her face again. I moved to sit in my usual spot, the chair next to the head of the table, the founder's chair. Richard cleared his throat loudly. "Dad," Richard said, his voice booming with newfound authority. "Why don't you sit over there?" He pointed to a chair near the far end of the table. Among the junior observers, the interns, the people who took notes but never spoke, confusion rippled through me. A hot flush crept up my neck. This wasn't right. This was a calculated insult. But I didn't want to make a scene, not with everyone watching. Not yet. I slowly walked to the chair and sat down. I felt the eyes of everyone in the room on me. Pity, amusement, indifference. The humiliation burned, but the worst was yet to come. Richard clicked a button. A presentation lit up the screen behind him. The title read, "Everlast Machining, The New Horizon." "Thank you for being here during this difficult time," Richard began. He didn't sound difficult. He sounded energized, excited. "My parents built a strong foundation. But the truth is, Everlast has stagnated." Stagnated. The word stung. "We are being outperformed," he continued, pacing the front of the room. "Our methods are archaic. Our overhead is bloated. Archaic." He was talking about my designs, my methods, the methods that built this company from the ground up. He clicked to the next slide, a graph showing declining profits over the last year. Red arrows pointing down. It was a visual punch to the gut, but it was a lie by omission. He didn't mention that those declines were because we had invested heavily in new research and development. A decision Elizabeth and I made together. Long-term growth over short-term profits. He was twisting the narrative. He was making us look like failures. "To survive," Richard said, "we need drastic changes. We need to be lean. We need to be aggressive. We need to modernize, optimize, and downsize." He paused. The words hung in the air, cold, corporate, heartless. He looked around the room, making eye contact with everyone. Except me. "It's time," he said, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. "To cut the dead weight." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Dead weight. A term for useless machinery, broken parts, scrap metal. I felt a chill creep up my spine. This wasn't a business meeting. This was an execution. And I was on the block. Richard turned, slowly. He looked directly at me. His face was impassive, almost bored. Starting with Dad, the silence that followed was lessening. It sucked all the air out of the room. It was broken by a nervous chuckle. One of the younger board members, a new guy Richard had brought in. Then, another laugh. Sarah let out a sharp, high-pitched giggle. It sounded like breaking glass. Soon, the entire table was erupting. A mix of forced, uncomfortable, and genuine laughter. They were laughing at me. The man who built the company. The man who had just buried his wife. The humiliation burned hotter than any grief. They didn't see Thomas Wright, the founder. They saw an obstacle, an old man in the way of their profits. Dead weight. I looked at Richard, searching for a flicker of regret, a hint of apology, a sign that my son was still in there somewhere. There was nothing. He looked back at me with the same cold detachment one might use when discarding a broken tool. My own son, my blood. I didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. The laughter died down instantly. The room went silent. I walked out of the boardroom, past the portraits of Elizabeth and me, hanging on the wall, our smiling eyes mocking me. I didn't look back. I couldn't if I had. They would have seen the tears burning in my eyes. I drove straight home. The house, once filled with Elizabeth's warmth and laughter, now felt like a tomb. Every memory was tainted. Richard's betrayal, the laughter, it echoed in the empty hallways. I picked up the phone. My hands were shaking again. I called Mr. Davis, the lawyer, the family friend. "Davis," I said, my voice rough. "What happened in there?" "I signed for CEO, not a hostile takeover." Mr. Davis sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "Thomas, I tried to warn you. I tried to tell you to read the fine print. To wait." "The fine print? He's my son, Davis." I was grieving. "He used that against you, Thomas." Davis said quietly, "The papers you signed were not just for the CEO title. They granted him full executive authority and a majority voting share." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What does that mean?" "It means he owns it all, Thomas," Davis explained. "He restructured the board while you were arranging the funeral. He stacked it with his own people. The vote this morning was just a formality. You've been voted out, of my own company, while I was burying my wife. But my shares," I stammered. "My personal shares. I still own 40% of the company." "Not anymore." Davis's voice was grim. He explained the poison pill. The restructuring allowed the company to buy back my shares at a drastically reduced valuation, citing the recent decline in profits. The decline Richard had highlighted in his presentation. "It's technically legal, Thomas," Davis said. "It's ruthless, but legal." I was numb. The room spun slightly. "So I have nothing? You have your pension," Davis said. His voice was tight with regret. "In the house. For now." For now. The words hung there. A threat disguised as reassurance. "But Thomas," Davis added, his voice dropping, "there's more. He's already talking about selling the factory to a developer. He's planning to outsource the production overseas. Sell the factory, the place I built. The place where Elizabeth and I spent our lives." The betrayal was deeper than I thought. This wasn't a sudden decision. It was a calculated assassination. And I had handed him the knife. The next few days were a blur, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I received a formal letter of termination in the mail, delivered by courier, cold, impersonal. My company email was deactivated. 40 years of contacts, gone. My access card to the factory I designed, denied. I was erased. In less than a week, one afternoon I drove to the factory. I needed to be there. The workshop floor, the smell of the oil, the hum of the machines. It was the only thing that made sense anymore. I pulled up to the gate. The security guard, a young man named Mike, saw me. I had hired him myself. His wife had just had a baby. He didn't open the gate. I rolled down the window. "Mike?" "It's me." Mike stepped out of the booth. He looked pained, genuinely upset, but he didn't move. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wright," he said, avoiding my eyes. "I have orders." "Orders? From who?" "From Mr. Wright, the new CEO." He winced. "You're not allowed on the premises, sir." My own people, turning me away from my own factory. That hurt more than anything, more than the laughter, more than the money. I drove away. I was the dead weight. I went back to the empty house. I sat in the dark. The silence screamed at me. I was 65 years old. My wife was gone. My son was a stranger. My life's work was stolen. I could have fought him, dragged him through the courts, spent years in litigation. But what would I win? The company was already becoming something unrecognizable, something cold and hollow, like Richard. The fight had gone out of me. I had to leave. The next morning, I called a realtor. "I want to sell the house," I said, "as quickly as possible. Cash offer. I don't care about the price." I packed 2 suitcases, one with clothes, the other with my tools. The calipers, the micrometers, the drafting tools that felt like extensions of my own hands. The tools Elizabeth had given me over the years. Everything else. The furniture, the memories, the betrayal. I left it behind. I looked at a map of the United States. I wanted to go somewhere completely different, somewhere far away from Chicago. From Richard. My finger landed on a small town in Washington state. Mountains and the sea. Aerospace and technology. a place where things were still being built. 3,000 miles away. It was perfect. I bought a one-way ticket. As the plane took off, I looked down at the Chicago skyline. The city I loved, the city that had broken my heart. I felt a pang of sadness, but also a strange sense of liberation. I was free, but freedom, I would soon learn, came with its own price. The first year in Washington was brutal. The rain was constant, a cold, damp chill that seeped into my bones. I was no longer Thomas Wright, the respected industrialist. I was just Tom, the old guy renting a small, cramped apartment above a coffee shop. My pension was barely enough to cover rent and food. I was poor, and I was alone. The loneliness was overwhelming. I missed Elizabeth terribly. Her laugh, the way she smelled like lavender, and old books. I missed the comfort of my old life, the sense of purpose, the feeling that I mattered. Here, I was nobody, and the world was eager to remind me of that fact. I started looking for work. I thought my decades of experience would be valuable. The region was booming with tech and aerospace startups. But the world had changed. Manufacturing wasn't about steel and sweat anymore. It was about code and algorithms. I had an interview at a robotics company. The hiring manager, a kid named Jake, looked barely old enough to shave. "Your resume is impressive, Mr. Wright," Jake said, barely looking up from his sleek laptop. "Everlast machining, big name back in the day." "We built quality," I said, trying to keep the pride in my voice. "We appreciate quality," Jake said, leaning back. "But we're looking for someone familiar with the latest CAD software and AI-driven manufacturing processes. Your experience seems a bit traditional, obsolete, archaic, dead weight." Richard's words echoed in my ears. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was a relic, a dinosaur waiting for the meteor. I didn't get the job. I didn't get any of the jobs. The rejection stung. It confirmed my deepest fears. I took odd jobs. Anything that involved my hands. I repaired broken machinery at a local farm. The work was hard. The pay was minimal. But it felt good. It felt honest. I fixed the espresso machine at the coffee shop downstairs. The owner, a kind woman named Maria, started bringing me pastries and coffee. "You have good hands, Tom," she said one morning, watching me adjust the pressure valve. "They're old hands, Maria," I replied. "Old hands know things new hands haven't learned yet," she said with a warm smile. It was a small comfort, a flicker of light in the darkness, but it wasn't enough to live on. One freezing winter night, the dampness in the apartment turned vicious. I woke up shivering. My chest felt tight, a crushing weight pressing down on my lungs. I struggled to breathe. I thought I was having a heart attack. The fear was paralyzing. I was alone, 3,000 miles from anyone who cared. I drove myself to the local clinic. The doctor diagnosed a severe respiratory infection, pneumonia, exacerbated by the dampness and the recess. "At your age, an infection like this can be fatal," the doctor warned. The incident shook me. I realized how vulnerable I was. If I got sick, if I couldn't work, I would end up homeless, broke, alone. I almost picked up the phone to call Richard, to beg for help. My pride was gone, replaced by fear, but the memory of that laughter in the boardroom stopped me, the coldness in his eyes, the smug look on Sarah's face. I would rather die than beg. I had to find another way. I had to survive. I started working harder, pushing my aging body to its limits. But I also started thinking, designing again. Not the heavy machinery parts I used to make. Something new, robotics, drones. I set up a small workshop in the corner of my apartment. I bought used equipment. I started tinkering. The familiar rhythm of design and creation soothed my soul. It felt like coming home, but I didn't know if it was too late. Then I received a call, a voice from the past. "Thomas Wright? Is that really you?" It was William. William was a retired engineer, one of the brightest minds I had ever known. We had worked together years ago at Everlast, before we moved to Seattle to join a major aerospace company. He had heard what happened. "Thomas, I heard about Elizabeth and Richard," William said, his voice filled with concern. "I can't believe he would do that to you." I told him everything. The humiliation, the struggle, the realization that I was obsolete. Obsolete? William scoffed. "Thomas, you're not obsolete. You're a genius." He came to visit me the following weekend. William looked at my cramped apartment, the small workshop, the prototypes I had been tinkering with. I had been working on a new type of high-precision actuator, a small, lightweight component, crucial for robotics, based on old principles but using new materials. William picked up one of the prototypes. His eyes gleamed with excitement. "Thomas," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "these designs, they're revolutionary. The industry needs this, Thomas," William insisted. "The current technology is bulky, unreliable, and expensive. Your design solves all those problems. It's lighter, stronger, more efficient. We decided to start a company right there in my tiny apartment. What should we call it?" William asked. I looked at the prototype, a phoenix, rising from the ashes. "Phoenix Precision," I said. It felt right. A new beginning, but the past wasn't done with me. Yet securing funding was the first hurdle. We pitched our idea to banks and investors. They saw two old men with a radical idea. They were skeptical. "The robotics market is crowded, gentlemen," one venture capitalist told us, dismissing us with a wave of his hand. "What makes you think you can compete, especially at your age?" Age. Always the age. We were rejected. Again and again. We were running on fumes. My savings were almost gone. William was dipping into his retirement fund. We needed a breakthrough. We needed to refine the actuator design, make it undeniable. To do that, I needed access to some specific technical data from my mass research, data that would save us months of trial and error. I knew exactly where it was stored, on the old Everlast server. I called Mr. Davis, the family lawyer. I hadn't spoken to him since I left Chicago. I told him about Phoenix Precision, about the data I needed. I asked if he could discreetly retrieve the files for me. Davis agreed to help. He still had access to the company's records. He was handling the ongoing restructuring of Everlast. "I'll see what I can do, Thomas," he promised. "I owe you that much. If this story is hitting home, if you've ever felt cast aside or underestimated, please hit the like button. And don't forget to subscribe. It helps more than you know, letting me know I'm not just talking into the wind. Because what I learned next changed everything." A few days later, Davis called me back. His voice was grim, heavy. "Thomas," he said, his voice trembling with anger, "I found the files you requested. But I found something else, something terrible." My blood ran cold. "What is it, Davis? What did you find?" I heard him take a shaky breath. "Richard, he didn't just take over the company after Elizabeth died." He paused. "He was actively sabotaging it while she was still alive." I couldn't breathe. The room felt suddenly airless. "Sabotaging? What do you mean?" "The declining profits over the last year," Davis explained, his voice tight with rage. "They weren't just due to the R&D investments, Thomas. They were manufactured." The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. The graph, the presentation, all lies. Richard was diverting high-value contracts, Davis continued, to a shell company, owned by Sarah. He was cooking the books, making Everlast look unprofitable, creating a pretext for the takeover and the devaluation of your shares. It wasn't just ambition. It was calculated deception. It was theft from his own parents. But that wasn't the worst part. The real betrayal was still waiting in the shadows. "And Thomas," Mr. Davis continued, his voice breaking, "Elizabeth knew." My heart stopped. "What?" "She suspected something was wrong," Davis whispered. "She was investigating the financial discrepancies in the weeks before she died. I found her notes, her private journal, hidden in a locked drawer in her office. My Elizabeth, my brilliant, fierce Elizabeth. She had known. She was heartbroken, Thomas," Davis said. "The entries, they're devastating." She confronted him. He denied everything, called her paranoid. The stress, it must have been unbearable. The pain was agonizing. A raw, gaping wound. My, had spent her final days fighting to save our legacy from our own son, and the stress, the betrayal, it might have contributed to her death. The doctors said her heart just gave out. But I knew what broke it. Richard broke it. The grief turned into a cold, burning rage. This was no longer just about my personal humiliation. It was about justice. It was about honoring Elizabeth's memory. I told William everything. He was furious. His face turned red, his hands clenched into fists. "We don't need the banks, Thomas," William said, his voice firm. "We don't need the venture capitalists. I have savings. I'll mortgage my house. I'll fund the startup myself." "William, you can't risk everything." "We'll build this company," William vowed, "and we'll make them regret the day they betrayed you. We'll make them pay for what they did to Elizabeth." Phoenix Precision was born, not out of hope, but out of rage. We rented a small, unused warehouse on the edge of town. It was cold and dusty, but it was ours. We started building, driven by a shared sense of purpose, a burning desire for justice. We worked day and night. We hired a small team of young engineers and technicians, people who were hungry, passionate. Our first hire was Alex, a brilliant young engineer fresh out of college. He looked at my designs with awe. "Mr. Wright," he said during his interview, "I studied your work in school. You're a legend. A legend, not dead weight." It felt good to be respected again. We refined the actuator design, built the specialized machines needed for production. I was back on the factory floor. The smell of oil and steel, the hum of the machines, it was music to my ears. Then the next hurdle came. Richard found out about Phoenix Precision. He learned that we were targeting the same markets he was trying to break into with the outsourced Everlast products. He didn't like the competition, so he tried to crush us. He tried to block our supplier contracts, threatening them with lawsuits if they did business with us, citing non-compete clauses buried deep in the documents I signed the night he took over. Some suppliers backed down, afraid of the legal battle, afraid of Richard's aggression. We were facing a critical shortage of materials. We were on the verge of collapse before we even started, but Richard underestimated us. He thought we were still operating in the old world, relying on the same suppliers, the same methods. William used his connections in the aerospace industry. He found alternative suppliers, companies that were developing new advanced materials, composites, ceramics, materials that were superior to what we had been using. The setback turned into an opportunity. Our actuators became even lighter, stronger, more efficient. Richard's sabotage had backfired. He had forced us to innovate. He had made us stronger. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, we grew. Word spread about the quality of our products. Our actuators were precise, reliable, built to last. Orders started coming in, first from small startups, then from major tech companies, then from the aerospace industry. We were competing with Everlast, and we were winning. 5 years passed. 5 years of hard work, sweat, sacrifice. Phoenix Precision was no longer a small startup. We were a multi-million-dollar company, the leader in high-precision robotics components. We had a state-of-the-art manufacturing facility, a team of 200 employees, a reputation for excellence. We were successful because we prioritized innovation, quality, integrity, Elizabeth's values. I was happy, truly happy. I found a new purpose, a new family. I was 70 years old, but I felt younger than I had in decades. Meanwhile, the news from Chicago was grim. Everlast Machining had collapsed. Richard's outsourcing strategy had backfired. The quality plummeted. The customers vanished. The company drowned in debt. He had destroyed Elizabeth's legacy in just 5 years, and the contract diversion scandal had come to light. Mr. Davis, unable to live with the injustice, had anonymously leaked the evidence. Elizabeth's notes, the financial records, the shell company details. He leaked them to the press and the authorities. The fallout was spectacular. Richard and Sarah were facing multiple lawsuits, fraud, embezzlement, potential criminal charges. They were ruined. I felt a strange mix of emotions, a grim satisfaction, a sense of justice, but also a profound sadness. He was still my son, and he had destroyed his own future, out of greed, arrogance. A few weeks later, we were celebrating the grand opening of our new headquarters, a beautiful building of glass and steel, overlooking the mountains, a testament to resilience, second chances. The gala was in full swing. Music, laughter. I was surrounded by the community that had embraced me. William, Alex, Maria, my new family. Then I saw them, and the music stopped. They stood near the entrance, looking completely out of place. Richard looked tired, older than his years. His expensive suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled, his eyes were hollow, desperate. Sarah stood beside him, her face pale and strained, her expensive clothes looking cheap in the elegant surroundings. The smug smile was gone, replaced by a tight, anxious frown. They saw me and started walking towards me. The crowd seemed to part around them, sensing the tension. The chatter died down. The silence was heavy. They stopped in front of me, breathing heavily, as if they had been running. They didn't apologize. They didn't say they missed me. They didn't even acknowledge the 5 years of silence. The 5 years of betrayal. Dad, Richard said, his voice strained. We're here. I looked at them, my son and his wife. The people who had destroyed my life. The people who had betrayed Elizabeth. Hello, Richard. Sarah. My voice was calm, steady. I saw the news about the opening, Richard continued, gesturing around the room, his eyes darting around, appraising the success. This is impressive. You did well, he said it, as if he was surprised, as if he still saw me as the dead weight. What are you doing here, Richard? I asked quietly. He took a deep breath, puffing out his chest, trying to regain some of his old arrogance, but it was a facade, a crumbling mask. The company, Everlast. Things went sideways, he said, adjusting his cufflinks. The nervous tick, he was lying. Bad market conditions, unreliable partners. And the legal troubles, their misunderstandings. We're fighting them. We need a fresh start, Thomas, Sarah interjected. Her voice was sharp, demanding. Not asking for help, expecting it. We need your help. We can fix it, Dad, Richard insisted, the desperation creeping into his voice. We can merge the two companies, Phoenix and Everlast. Combine my business expertise with your innovation. His business expertise, the expertise that bankrupted a 40-year-old company. We can rebuild the empire, he continued, together as partners. He genuinely believed it. He thought he could just walk back into my life, after everything he had done, and demand a partnership. The entitlement was staggering. I need a job, Dad, Richard said, his voice lowering slightly. But the demand was still there. Drabathat, Jayapurip said, his voice lowering slightly. But the demand was still there. I need a position worthy of my skills. CEO, COO, something at the executive level. He paused, looking around the grand hall. Where's my office? I looked at him for a long moment. I saw the same greed, the same ambition, the same coldness that I had seen in the boardroom 5 years ago. He hadn't learned anything. He hadn't changed. The realization hit me with a wave of sadness. But also clarity. He was still my son, but he was no longer my family. My family was here, in this room. William, standing beside me, his hand resting supportively on my shoulder. You seem to be confused, Richard, I said, my voice calm and steady, cutting through the silence. He frowned. Confused? Dad, this is a golden opportunity, for both of us. 5 years ago, I said, my voice rising slightly, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear.
You stood in front of the board, in front of the people I respected, and you called me dead weight. I paused, letting the words sink in, and you all laughed. Richard flushed, the color rising in his cheeks. Dad, that was a long time ago. I was under a lot of pressure, and that was just the beginning, I continued, my voice cold as steel. You didn't just dismiss me, Richard. You didn't just steal my company. I took a step closer to him, my eyes boring into his. You sabotaged the company while your mother was dying. You diverted contracts to Sarah's shell company. You stole from us while she was fighting for her life. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Richard paled, the color draining from his face. Your mother knew, Richard, I said, my voice trembling with emotion.
The rage bubbling to the surface. She knew what you were doing. She spent her final days trying to stop you, trying to save the legacy she loved. Tears welled up in my eyes. The stress, the betrayal, it broke her heart, Richard. It killed her, and I will never forgive you for that. Richard stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. He had no defense, no excuses. The truth was out. Sarah glared at me, her eyes filled with hatred. Not remorse, hatred. And now you want a partnership. I shook my head slowly. You think leadership is a title you inherit, a suit you wear? You have no idea what it means to build something. You only know how to destroy. The silence stretched between us, heavy, suffocating. So, no, I said finally. There will be no partnership. Not now, not ever. And as for you, Sarah, I turned to her, my eyes cold. You are not welcome here, ever. Richard looked crushed. The arrogance drained away, leaving behind a desperate, broken man. But Dad, he whispered, the desperation raw in his voice. What am I supposed to do? I lost everything. We might go to jail. I looked at him, feeling a strange mix of pity and disappointment. He was still my son, and I was still his father. You need a job, I said, my voice softening slightly. And I have one for you. If, after you have faced the consequences of your actions, after you have paid your debt to society, if you still want to learn. His eyes lit up briefly, a flicker of hope.
Yes, anything.
I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. I handed it to him. He looked at it, confused. What is this? It's an application form, I said, for an entry-level position in the workshop. Janitorial staff, I clarified. The pay is minimum wage. The hours are long. You'll be sweeping the factory floor, cleaning the machines. The machines I designed. Richard stared at the form, his face turning red with anger and humiliation. Are you serious? I'm your son. I have an MBA. I was CEO. I corrected him. And here you are nothing. You have to earn your place. Just like everyone else. You have to learn humility, I continued. Integrity, and the value of an honest day's work. You have to understand the sweat and the sacrifice that goes into building something real. I handed him the form. He looked at it as if it were poison. The choice is yours, Richard, I said. I turned away from them. The confrontation was over. The music seemed to start again. The chatter resumed. The party continued. Richard and Sarah stood there, alone, the realization of their downfall finally hitting them. They looked around the room, at the successful empire I had built without them. Then they turned and walked out. I watched them go, the weight of the past finally lifting off my shoulders. I was free, truly free. I walked over to the new production line, where a state-of-the-art robotic arm was assembling the actuators with mesmerizing precision. I touched the dedication plaque on the machine. It read, in loving memory of Elizabeth Wright, the heart and soul. I looked at the machine, a symbol of the future I had built from the ashes of the past. I had lost everything, but I had found myself. I had rebuilt my life, not out of revenge, but out of love. Love for the work, love for Elizabeth, and love for the man I used to be. The smell of oil and steel filled the air, the most beautiful perfume in the world. We did it, Elizabeth, I whispered, a genuine smile spreading across my face. We did it. Thanks for listening. Please rate this story in the comments. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe. Your support means everything, because your time matters.